Welcome everyone, back with another chess video. And so for this one we have a really common mistake that I see very often, and this one is especially common, not even so much beginners, but especially the kind of beginner to intermediate range, I feel. But I've seen all levels fall for this mistake. Even some advanced players sometimes make this error. So what exactly am I referring to? And so I'm going to give a few different examples and kind of show what this looks like. But before I get to those exact game examples, I'd like to take a bunch of pieces off the board and let's just show very clearly, with just very few things left, exactly what I'm talking about. So here there's a very common mistake that a lot of players make, especially when it's unprovoked, but sometimes it's provoked, where you have some kind of piece either on c3, f3, f6, or c6. And in those cases, it's usually a knight that you have there, just because usually the knights just develop to those natural squares. So oftentimes it's a knight, but not always is it a knight. And so the mistake is, especially when it's unprovoked, capturing here and then allowing the other side to strengthen their center. And oftentimes it'll be a bishop, because, this knight will be pinned by bishop. But sometimes it's actually a knight that trades itself for another knight. And so oftentimes this is actually a bad move. And first of all, you're trading off a piece that's usually active and doing something. Not to say that this isn't always active, but it's, maybe a little further back on their territory. Something that maybe more credence to say that this developed piece is at least in the enemy territory. If we look at the side of the board, this is like black's half of the board here. And so, with that being said, it's like this black piece is actually in white's territory, whereas this knight is actually just kind of sitting at home, not doing much. So usually speaking, this piece would be more valuable. But the reason why this is a mistake is because oftentimes when they take, all you do is you take back, but now this pawn is actually a very strong pawn. And why is it so strong? Because it's supporting the center. And especially if you have a pawn duo like this kind of configuration here is just very strong, because oftentimes you'll want to fight against the center if you're, the opponent. And this pawn just does a really great job of supporting your center. So you don't really want to help your opponent. So with that being said, I'm going to go to a few examples here, two different games that I'll show. Not the entire game, but just the position. You can kind of see how these come up at many different levels. So the first example here, this is just a random position here, and we have this configuration here, where we have this bishop here, this knight here, and you can probably guess the move, and that move, of course, that was played was, bishop captures c6. In this case, unprovoked. Maybe in some cases you can make an argument to wait until a move like a6. That way at least we've wasted a move for this. But oftentimes, even in this case, you'll just want to retreat the bishop back and maintain the tension in most positions. Because the problem here is when they take, this just helps me strengthen the center. And so now black is actually with a pretty decent center. 3 pawns here versus this like 1 pawn, really. And this pawn isn't really doing much for this battle for the center. So this is just like normal opening principles where controlling the center is very important. And you don't want to help the opponent actually reinforce their center. Now, a lot of players might wonder, well, is this a backwards pawn? Is this a weakness, right? Because they can't really advance because this pawn could always take it. And honestly, this pawn is perfectly fine where it's at because it's doing a really good job of supporting our center. If for whatever reason we think we're getting closer to an endgame or somewhere where maybe they think the center isn't as valuable, even though the center is pretty important always, you could also just advance this pawn. And if they take, they just help you develop a bishop. So it's really not a big deal here. And so really, I would just leave this pawn on c6, and we have a very fine position. But it's not just lower, players to intermediate that make this mistake. Like I said, even more advanced players make this mistake. So now I'm going to go to another game here, closer to 2000 level. And even at this level, sometimes players will make this mistake. For this one, I can actually show the opening because it was very close to the opening here. So I played d4, pretty common here, d5, Queen's Gambit decline, that looks pretty normal. Both sides develop, and all this is super, super common. Everyone's seen this a bunch before. Now, if you play the exchange variation, which I do, then c captures d5 is your move. Otherwise, you just maintain the tension and keep developing. Something like knight f3 is a move. Bishop f4 is a move. Even bishop at g5 is a move. There's a lot of Queen's Gambit ideas here that you could also play. But trading is also fine. And if you want the very typical Queen's Gambit decline structure, then you'll just take back with the e-pawn, and I think both sides are doing fine here. It's just a regular game. However, sometimes they actually take with the knight. And if you don't follow up with one exact move, I think this move is actually a little inaccurate already. And so why is that inaccurate? Well, here's why. Because now we get to play e4 with tempo, so we're gaining the center. And so now where's this knight going? This d5 knight really doesn't have too many places to go to. You know, if you retreat back to f6, like, so what? I'll just develop, and you don't really have much. You know, all you've done is you've let white take the center with gain of time. So that's really no good. And similar, you know, if you just retreat the knight somewhere else, same problem, you know, and we can just develop. So really the best move for them, unfortunately, is probably to take here. And the problem with that, as we've just mentioned with this video, is this is kind of positionally questionable, I think, because now we play this really nice pawn capture and we've reinforced our center. And this is really like a gold mine for white. You know, for the positional player who just wants to have a nice center, pawn duo right here in the center especially, and it's supported by this pawn, it's just very strong. You know, if we were to go back a few moves, we can see how that's very different from here. Because if we go back right now, both sides are fighting for the center. This is equal. And you just go a few moves later, and now we see that white is in complete control of the center. And they have an easy game now, or at least easier than black. You know, white is already up like half a pawn here if you let the engine run deeper. But let's just say that, you know, black plays a normal Queen's Gambit decline type move. Sometimes he plays c6 to try and deter d5 from coming. So let's just say that this happens. Then all you have to do is just keep developing. This is exactly how my game went, where I just went bishop d3, they develop, I develop, and then no nonsense, I just get castled. And white is a really comfortable game here. And so you just have no nonsense, you just, you know, keep using opening principles, but we have the center and it's reinforced. And so if this is the case, then you could argue that maybe their knight move actually was not so great. Now remember, I said there was one exception that they could kind of do, one exact move that they have that maybe would justify in this exact case. And so I'll mention it in this video just to kind of have the sense of completeness for this rule. So instead of c6, what they could actually do is play c5. This is very theoretical. This is the semi-trash is what we're going to try and go for. And the idea is, yes, we've given the center to white, but now we have to strike it immediately. And by immediately striking the center, maybe you can try and justify this. But if you wait, then white just has the center in this case. So one possible line you could go here is like developing, we trade, this bishop check, you block the check, we trade on d2, and then you castle. And this is actually the main line of the semi-Tarrasch. Very common stuff. This is the main line of the exchange variation. It doesn't have to go this way, and the game is still, you know, plenty left to play. But this is all opening theory. And, you know, if black plays the semi-Tarrasch, you know, they're probably more familiar with these lines than white, even if white might be a smidge better. So maybe this is a saving grace if you really want to play this for black. Honestly, I'm not really too fond of this opening for black. I think like they have better options. I think, you know, this one isn't really too fighting against white, but it's an option nevertheless. So like I was saying, I think generally speaking back here, this whole thing is probably positionally at least dubious to me, because it just helps you get the center, and now it's reinforced. And, you know, if you want to try and give them the center and then fight against it with something like c5 immediately, I think there's better ways to fight for the center, but why give them the center for free? And so in that case, it's just better to, you know, go back a few moves. You just play e-captures instead, and I think this is objectively better. So thanks for stopping by, everyone. Hope that was helpful. See you in the next chess video.